Welcome to the 7 People podcast, your guide to creating irresistible organizations. And today we're welcoming Luke Omani, who is the founder of SapienX, creator of the People First product-led digital course and community, and also host of the PX Espresso Hour podcast. So super excited to welcome you, Luke. So you're one of the leading proponents of the people experience as a product concept, which right now in HR is a really hot topic and something like we talk a lot about at 7 People. So yeah, I guess I wanted to just dive in and find out like, what is that all about? What do we mean with product-led people experience?
It's an excellent question. So I'll cover it at a high level and then we can drill down into some specifics. And I think what's really cool about the concept and the movement that's building around it is that people are bringing their own spin. So there is not one single way to approach it, but there is a core concept. So that's what we'll dive into. I don't know if it's useful as well for the listener. So in terms of background context, I was a head of people and ops in a scaling startup myself. And in that role, through a combination of will and naivety, I said yes to far too many things. So
can relate.
I ended up actually operationally responsible for everything to do with people and culture and talent, but also actual product, marketing, brand, and a lot of the strategy around go-to-market. So I ended up actually operationally...
Like the head of ops, the head of operations,
kind
right?
of. We didn't have like a traditional structure, but I guess it was more of a COO role by the time I left with, heavy lens on people, brand and product.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of context. And so what that did for me is it exposed me to a load of different ways of working in those different functions, which flagged to me that a lot of the ways we work in HR are pretty clunky and transactional and very one-dimensional for the most part. And they don't really serve employee or business in any meaningful way if you keep to the traditional HR practices. So, bit of background context. To the core question, what is PX as a product? Essentially, it's the idea of viewing work itself and the experience of work as if it were a product, and specifically as if it were a subscription product. That's certainly the position that I take, and I know that Jesse Swan, who I think you both are familiar with, also takes that position. Yeah. Oh, you're holding the book right now.
Yes.
Awesome.
Let's show up to the camera.
That's awesome. It's a great book. Get the book. It's awesome. And Jesse's awesome. So listen to anything that you can find where she's speaking, read anything she's written. She's great. But other practitioners are taking the perspective of HR as a product, which is an improvement, but I think misses the bigger picture, because then they're productizing HR products and services, which, like I say, is an improvement, because that means you're starting to take a more customer-centric lens. You're starting to think more about the end user, the impact beyond the program. So that's a great lens, but I think the better lens, personally, is to look at work itself as the subscription product. So that's the sort of core essence of the concept, whether it's product-led, PX, whether it's productizing HR, whether it's people ops as a product, whether it's PX as a product, they all essentially mean the same thing. Yeah. Okay. It's applying a product lens to the experience of work.
And one question before we dive in, because I was reading the book of Jessica Zwaan, and in the beginning she mentioned that Steve Jobs in the 90s already started with this like product way of thinking, think different. And personally, I only saw this trend really since 2023 or something coming up in the world of HR. Why do you think we are such late adapters?
Well, what accelerated it was COVID, believe it or not. I mean, it did a lot of things, but it certainly changed what work was, and it got a lot of people questioning what their experience of work was. And I don't know whether it was by design or coincidence, but people like myself had stumbled across this concept. So for me, it was just the reason I'm here and the reason that I know you guys is because I've built an audience, right? When I was a head of people, I didn't have an audience. I was just doing the work. And so it was only when I left that role and I started to share how I'd been working and sharing some of these product and design ways of work, just simply sharing them, that I realized that, people are really interested in that. And around the same time, Jessie had released her blog, People Ops as a Product, which is ultimately what led to the book. Yeah. It was that blog and its popularity that gave rise to the opportunity for more of us to join that conversation. That's certainly how it happened for me.
So maybe like, just to make sure I've got this straight, because I think I work in a product way, but I'm not like 100% sure, right? So I'm going to give you an example of when I didn't work in a product way, like where I didn't apply product principles, right? So what happened was, like, as a company I was working at a few years ago, and me and the head of people were like, okay, cool, we need to redesign the performance process, right? So then like we went in a room, we're like, we're so smart, great HR people. And we got the whiteboard out and some sticky notes, and we made a really cool performance process that we really liked. And then just went ahead and launched it, and didn't really talk to anyone about it. And we were like, this is amazing, did the whole launch. And then it completely failed, right? Because the leadership weren't behind it. It didn't, the feedback we got was it's a box ticking exercise, something fun HR made that like no one is using and didn't add any value to the business. So that's when I didn't apply product principles, right? Does that sound right?
Yeah, I mean, a number of things went wrong with that. But yeah, essentially what you did was you were solution-led.
Right.
And so you focused in on what you thought was a good idea as a group, and you set about building that, and you expected when you launched it that everyone would pat you on the back and say, thank you very much for this awesome thing. And what they actually said was, what is this? We didn't ask for it. Why have you created this? Take it back. Yeah. So at the essence of, this is a really important point actually. So it can sound quite intimidating, all of the language around product-led, and now do I have to be an agile coach, and do I have to really understand product development? Do I have to become a UX designer? No, none of those things. You just have to understand the core concepts of what it means to solve real problems using the methodologies and tooling that we can pick up from product and agile and UX. So it's about applying the tooling and the logic to organizational challenges. And so at the heart of your question there, the base condition for building a product that has any chance of establishing product market fit is to really understand the end user need that you're intending to solve, right?
It's just like starting with the problem first.
You have to.
Yeah.
Like
The why.
Yeah.
The why, yeah.
Okay.
The why, yeah. And you can use actually the lean manufacturing 5 whys to drill down to that. So for anyone listening who's not familiar, it's the idea of literally asking the question why 5 times. So if someone proposes an idea, you drill down on it and you drill down on it and you force everyone to get down to essentially the first principle of the problem. Like, what is the origin? What is the actual thing that we know 100% to be true? Not things that we're assuming, but actually what do we actually know to be true about this problem? And let's start there with our solution. And so that's really critical. HR as a profession is guilty of being very solution-led. So we're going to come up with this thing and we're going to sell it to you. And that is at the heart of why the product-led approach is the core principles of being focused on problems that actually exist and building solutions that deliver value for the end user. But a linked principle is the idea of waste in product and in lean manufacturing. Waste is determined as anything that doesn't add value to the end user. And I think that's also a really useful principle to apply to your work in HR and people ops, is if we can't track what we're doing back to end user value, we should not be doing it. It's considered waste, even if we think it's a good idea as HR. If we can't anchor it in real value creation for the end user, be that employees, the business at large, and helping the business achieve its objectives, or any other end user that you can identify, if there's no value, it's waste.
Yeah.
Okay. And for me, to make it a bit more practical, let's say I'm a newbie in HR and the head of people asked me to create a working from home policy. And I start doing research, I start typing, I can create this nice policy.
You have like hybrid, you have like
you have so many
weeks.
Options. And how can I approach this differently with a more product mindset?
Yeah, so
this project.
Pause immediately.
Okay.
Because you went straight into solutionizing,
exactly.
even in that little example.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, okay, first of all, it can sound a little bit antagonistic, but it's for the right reasons. The first question to ask is, why do we need the policy?
Yeah.
So it's like, drill down into that. Like, are we creating a policy because everyone has a policy, so we should have a policy.
Yeah.
Again, I'm just going to use product language, so apologies. If I'm talking about, let's just say for this conversation, if I say end user, I'm talking about employee, just to keep it clean.
Yeah.
Is there an actual end user problem that we've identified? Is there a bottleneck, a pain point that is coming up consistently that is indicating that we don't have a clear enough policy for this? And if that's the case, then let's focus on that, where that issue is arising, and let's have a look at, do we need a specific policy for that use case, or is this symptomatic of a wider problem?
So like in the or remote work or hybrid policy, whatever we want to call it, right? So if I think about some of the end users, it could be, okay, well, I don't know, we have a problem attracting talent, right? Or we have a low employee satisfaction score, or the well-being is low, and then for the work from home policy could be a solution to those problems, right? Is that the right kind of thinking?
Maybe, but again, we're assuming quite a lot there. Have we identified specific needs? So you mentioned talent attraction. So, okay, well then, if I'm let's just say I'm head of people, and you're coming to me to say, we need to do this policy because, it was going to help us with talent attraction, then I'm going to say, well, okay, where's the evidence for that?
Yeah.
So part of the role for all of us, whether we are the head of people with a team that's reporting into us, whether we are a team of, let's say, the three of us in this room, or a team, we operate on peer level, but we've got different specialisms, it's also our job to hold each other accountable and say, well, if you're telling me there's a problem, show me the evidence. So, in that example, talent acquisition, okay, show me the feedback from candidates, from people that we've onboarded recently, show me the evidence that this is a problem. Go and speak to candidates that, we can see have started the process and then left. Go and speak to them, find out what the reasons were.
Is that means you have some kind of like hypothesis, and then you're testing the hypothesis, is that right?
Essentially,
like that?
yes.
Yeah.
And it's exactly that idea.
And that's what I'm hearing. It's more like doing proper research first instead of going into firefight modus immediately, what normally you do when you work in HR operations
100%.
Especially. And let's say we do have the evidence. We did a very thorough survey. I don't know, we had conversations with the employees, and everybody is like, this working from home policy is not working. We need to create something new. What is then the next step?
So part of the research phase would be, why isn't it working?
Yeah, exactly.
So we've identified.
We find the why. Yeah.
We'll drill down to the why.
Yeah.
These are the reasons it's not working. So then you go into your classic. You can use this model because it's really simple. The classic double diamond design framework, which is trying to visualize it for the listener or watcher at home. It's two triangles. If you imagine they're both on their side, one facing right, one facing left, and the flat edges are together. So you get this sort of diamond pyramid on its side. So it works on the basis of divergence and convergence. So divergence is discovery. So let's find out everything that we need to know about this problem. Once we think we've got enough information, we've drilled down on, okay, we've identified the problem exists, we now know why it exists and some of the most common challenges. We then go, okay, let's ideate. What are all the possible solutions that we could come up that might solve this problem? So you converge on a single idea or a couple of prototypes that you want to test. And then you go into the second part of the diamond, which is then to design that prototype and deliver that prototype. Depending on how nerdy you want to get. And I also don't want to scare people because it doesn't have to be complicated. Yeah. If you wanted to get really nerdy about it and do it really well, you would also have a really good set of data that shows you the baseline metrics as evidence of the problem. So in that case, we've got very clear disengagement in these parts of the business, and we can tie that exactly back to the fact that we don't have a clear enough work from home, remote work policy. We can also see that there's a problem in talent acquisition. And again, we've drilled down, we've found the data. People are telling us they're not applying because they don't understand our work from home policy, or that it isn't conducive to what they want. So we know what the baseline is. So applications, for example, to conversion before are this. We know that our candidate dropout rate is Y. And we know that in this area of the business, our productivity is lower, we have higher absenteeism, and we've tracked that back exactly to the fact that people don't have the flexibility they need. So you need some baselines if you're going to do it really scientifically. You then build a very basic prototype. So, okay, what is the You might have heard the phrase minimal viable product. Again, Jesse talks about this. It's very common, very popular in any product or lean discussion, is what is the most basic version of the solution that we can create to get into the hands of the end user so that they can give us feedback on it. Because what we don't want to do is double down on that end solution before we understand that we're actually on the right track. And this is where product-led really comes into its own, because the actual product-led mindset from an actual product perspective is actually building the product based on the end user and how they interact with it. So you make no assumptions. You give them access to the prototype, they engage with it, you track that, you understand, has it had a positive impact relative to the baseline or negative, and then you can make iterations.
Let's say a product I'm working on right now is a performance product, right? And actually, I think it's going to be an interesting discussion because there's different users at different levels in this. But let's say the reason we landed on it is because what we're trying to do is like drive a high performance culture. And the reason we landed on that is because you probably know, right? Like there's been more and more pressure on productivity and outcomes and delivery nowadays, let's say. And the problem or the challenge we had is it wasn't at the expected level. And so we're trying to drive that outcome. And one of the levers we have is the performance cycle, right? So we're in the phase of changing that. But indeed, we wanted to get it out to the users as fast as possible. So we're like, we've launched a minimal viable product. And then we're already, like, let's say testing it with managers and employees. Because then it's like, okay, cool, we're going to start using the product and then get some feedback on it, reiterate, and then go again. Is that like...
What you're talking about is called the validation loop, essentially. Validated learning loop. And that comes from the Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And that's where the phrase MVP first emerged. But it's that concept of take a minimal viable product, something that's tangible that the end user can use. Depending on how nerdy you want to get, you can an MVP can actually be something that doesn't exist. So you can have a smokescreen MVP. An example I always give about
smokescreen.
Yeah, it happens a lot. You've probably interacted with them without even knowing about it. But let's give a HR example. Let's say that
the working from home policy, maybe.
Working from home policy, you could do. So what you could do in that sense is you could create essentially a shop window. Like you could whip up a Notion page or whatever it might be. You could give some options for different types of policies that don't exist yet. You've not created them. You're not putting any legwork into them. But you could essentially have people, fill their shopping cart, if you like, but they could see which ones they're interacting with most, see which ones they're clicking more information. So you can actually see where the interest lies and you can start to test actually what are most relevant to the end user in that example. Another one would be like benefits, for example. You could do the same kind of idea.
Yeah, when you're talking, it's reminding me of when I worked at an e-commerce company, and then it's kind of like the CRO, let's say, conversion rates online for where they would like when the marketing team would A/B test like the shopping cart, for example, and then the one gets more clicks than the others, and that's the one. Is that the right kind of thing?
A/B testing is like a brilliant thing to do in HR and people more generally. And again, you can. The easy place to start with that is in your comms and testing different types of comms to different user groups and seeing what leads to greater engagement with a particular program, and you can iterate it. Literally, the world is your oyster, but experimentation sits at the core, and data validated experimentation. So experimentation, whether it's MVPs that you're putting into action, testing, getting feedback on, going, yep, that is working, that is having a positive impact. We'll do more of that, and actually we found out that this bit needs to be improved, and that's a nice add-on. And then it becomes an iterative process of development. The key then is to understand at what stage do you ship it into like full production, if you like, if we stick on the language. But when do you go from MVP to something that's more established, you'll be able to see a plateau. Like, okay, the more improvement we make here is not actually impacting that baseline anymore. So we've actually achieved a pretty good result. So we can leave that now and we can put that energy and effort into something else.
Question, sorry, was quite technical for me. So if we translate this back to, I just stick with the working from home policy example. So that means, okay, we tested, we put it on Notion, we saw, okay, this the way is getting a lot of clicks. We're putting it out there. We're actually going to do it. We're going to implement it. And then we're going to do something like a pilot or something and test it and see if it works. And like, how does that step exactly work in
exactly
practice?
That.
Yeah.
I'd be cautious to rush straight into like full solution. But then, exactly that. What's the pilot of this? So a framework that I like to use for this, very simple, is design for the worst affected user. Mm-hmm. So who actually in your sample group is most affected by the work from home policy in the most negative ways, and let's actually do the pilot for them first, because actually that's going to, one, solve the most urgent need without us having to focus on the whole employee populace, but it's also going to allow us to refine the approach and get feedback before we then expand that rollout to other user groups. And that concept of designing for the worst possible, worst affected end user is brilliant, because the net outcome is it improves the experience for all users, but you're focusing on the most critical challenge first.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes. So you have like focus groups, kind of, right?
You would do that as part of your discovery, for sure. And then, you can have a pilot group that are going to actually use your new policy for whatever the duration.
Before we roll it out through the whole company.
And you'd have to, I don't want to scare people, because it can all sound quite nerdy, but I really want to emphasize, I'm going to answer your question and give you the correct answer, but I want to emphasize for everybody that you don't have to go like straight to these levels. It is purely, to start with, it's a mindset shift. That's the only thing.
Yeah.
Where can we experiment? Where can we slow down a little bit?
Yeah.
Before we do anything, can we prove that the problem exists? And if the problem exists, does it tie back to a business critical challenge? I think Jesse talks about maximize impact to the mission as a principle, i.e., are we putting our time, energy and effort into the problems that are most critical to the business achieving its outcomes, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So as a mindset piece, ignore all the technicals. You can figure that out as you go. Just make sure that you're solving real problems that drive real impact. Once you're running that pilot group, what you'll need to understand, and this is going to be specific to the program or project you're running, is what period of time is statistically viable. Is statistically valuable to know whether it's had an impact. Because something like a policy of that nature change might be a longer period of time to be able to understand the real level of impact that it's had. Whereas something that's more trivial, you could measure immediately. Yeah. So that might be access to benefits. Like people are there, we don't know where to go, we don't know, or paid time off is a classic. Like there's so much friction that happens around that process. You can create some quick wins there by understanding the problems and fixing those, and your time to statistic validity is much shorter, because you can probably see almost overnight or within a week or two, like, oh, okay, we've massively improved people's experience of booking PTO. We're getting a lot less negative feedback. People are using this particular function on the HRS a lot more because they now know where to go for it, and we've cleaned up the process. So you can measure stuff like that really quickly. But something like a core policy change, you might need to measure over a longer period of time before you know whether it's actually had the impact you'd intended.
And what is a longer period of time? Like a quarter or half a year? Or
it's going to be specific to the program, specific to the cadence of your organization. Like how often does,
I think this example would be like a year. Maybe more even.
Well, you also don't want to have it too long, So you also, as long as you can evidence that it has improved the situation, then you can go ahead and go to the next step of the rollout. But my point being is, again, just because it works temporarily or it seems to solve the problem initially, think about the problem you're solving and over what duration does that problem exist, so that you can make sure that you understand.
But when I hear you talk, actually, what I'm thinking a lot is you're spending way more time on the research and experimentation phase, because I think like a lot of the time there is a live business issue that we're trying to solve. We'll discuss it with the leadership. Maybe when I'm talking about the leadership, I'm specifically talking about the management team, so the C-level people. Then we'll test it with like the heads of departments, and then if they're maybe there's some improvements that they make, and then we roll it out to the whole company. That's generally how I see it go. But there's actually not as much of, okay, well, let's create the prototype and have a smaller group we test it with. Do you see that as well, Flo?
I 100% agree. I did do it once, a pilot kind of way more, but that was with the whole company.
Yeah.
And that was for like 3 months. And that was also because the company wasn't that big, so it wasn't that complicated. But never like that I really used little focus groups or specific people to test it with first. So I really like that, the way of thinking, to be honest. It is quite new to me.
And I guess the challenge that you would have, like as 7 people, for example, is that you are in there to run specific projects over a specific period of time.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to find a way of accelerating that process, but without skipping the step.
Yeah.
Because it might be that in your context, a particular client has engaged you to solve a particular problem. And it might be that you then, I'm just making some assumptions. It might be then you take that problem at face value and you solve it.
Yeah.
But actually, is that the real problem?
Yeah.
And so it's like, maybe for you, it's about spending a little bit of time, a little bit more time during that customer. And again, I don't know what your process is.
Well,
during the onboarding process of that new customer, like really deeply understanding and challenging them and being a lot more critical about, how do you know this problem exists? Where is this showing up in your business? And can we factor in, even if it's like, can we just factor in an extra 2 weeks at the start of this project to really make sure we understand this problem before we move on? And just setting those base level of expectations that I don't think any of your clients are going to push back too strongly, as long as you can tell them why that's important to do.
We're lucky in the sense that most of the companies we work with are tech companies, also specifically in Amsterdam. So if we look at their engineering departments, they're already working in agile ways. They're used to having a minimal viable product. So actually what I noticed when you start using product like language in the boardroom, let's say, you actually see the management team nodding away because you're talking their language right? Rather than HR language.
You talk beef, not spaghetti.
Yeah, exactly.
So 100%.
But one thing that I did notice is that a lot of time the leadership team don't even know what the problem is. They're like, we want more engagement. We want high-performing teams. I'm like, great. How am I going to solve this?
This is the thing. That's why I sort of joke and say being product-led can be quite antagonistic, because you have to ask a lot of questions that make people feel uncomfortable, because executive teams often will sit around the table and make wild assumptions about the business and what's going on, and like, we can see X over there and it's because of Y, and generally it's not challenged. So it's like, let's tell that head of department to solve that problem, or let's speak to HR about this and tell them to come up with a solution. It's like, everyone calm down. Like, let's just slow down a little bit here.
I think also what I hear leadership say a lot is like, we need to move the needle, and I guess you could just push back, what needle do you want me to move?
What needle? Like, and how do we know it's not moving? Yeah. Like, where's the baseline? Yeah. So it's like, it can sound a little bit challenging, particularly from a traditional HR mindset, which is very service-based, which is HR in service of the employees, in service of the business. If I talk about this, it's one of my classic sort of statements, which is, if we want people to think differently about HR, we have to think differently in HR. And so we have to take the initiative in setting different boundaries, having different conversations, recontracting your role. So, if you were to, let's say you're a head of people listening to this now, or you're in any HR role, have you had a conversation with your key stakeholders where you ask them, tell me what you think my job is?
Love that.
Have that conversation, because you'll find that there's a disconnect between what they think you're there to do and what you're actually there to do. And then that can be the foundations of recontracting your role, reestablishing the correct boundaries, and making it much clearer about why you're pushing back when you're pushing back. Because otherwise it can be, HR's being annoying again. They're not doing what I asked them to do, or whatever it might be. But actually just recontract, have that conversation. And that's from every level. Because I think it's especially classic, I think, in a startup where they think, okay, now's the time to bring in a head of people.
Yeah.
But they don't actually know what that person is there to do, other than the fact that they know that they need one, and they've experienced HR before, and they know that it plays a role. Yeah,
and I think also with that one, and in the example you just gave, and then they're bringing in a head of people, whereas the rest of the leaders are all C-level people. Why don't you bring in a HR director or a VP HR or a chief people officer, right? Because of the way they see the role. 100%.
And the title for me is like irrelevant.
Yeah.
But you're exactly right. It's like it has to be on the same level. I use this example as well. It's like completely anecdotal. But have you read the book 7 Dysfunctions of a Team? Patrick Lencioni.
Lencioni, yeah.
great. I really like the book. I think the principles in it are brilliant. But what was most interesting for me, for anyone who's not read it or listened to it, it talks through like a semi-hypothetical real example of a tech business and how they had to bring in a new CEO, restructure the leadership team. It tells this story. What I found fascinating in that is they do the whole thing with all the different VPs of marketing and sales and ops and product and CEO. Right at the very end of the book, it's like, hey, and we sorted all the problems and we started to scale and we brought in a head of HR. And I was like, just like literally just, we brought in a head of HR. It's like, why was that person not there at the start and part of this whole strategic leadership conversation? Because your people are the business.
Yeah.
Now, I think the reason why we don't have that elusive seat at the table, as it's spoken about far too much, I think there's a lot of, if it can be harsh, there's a lot of victim mindset in the industry. Like, why don't we have the seat at the table yet? And a lot less of, let's go and prove why we should. Mm-hmm. So, that's my challenge to anyone listening. If you think you should be there, make sure you can communicate your value clearly.
Which links back to solving like business issues, right? Because if you're solving business issues, then you're delivering value. And I like the question about asking what their job is. Another good question that I learned is, as a CEO, what's keeping you up at night?
Mm.
And then if you can help solve that issue, then you're going to add value.
100%. And you can do that with all of your key stakeholders. So like, let's just say you're a HR business partner. You don't have to be a head of. Like, who is it that you're partnering with? Go and have a conversation with them. Like, what are the biggest challenges that you are going to face in the next period, whatever we define it, a quarter, month, year, whatever the defined period is. What is your biggest problems? What's keeping you up at night, both operationally and strategically, but also just purely from a people perspective? Like, get the full picture.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well then let's now make a plan. Like, how can I enable you to solve those problems through your people? Or what can I do? And again, it just changes the dynamic because people are so used to HR being this support function that only turns up when something's gone wrong.
Yes.
People are so used to that idea of HR. We've all experienced it, I think. I definitely experienced that as an employee when I was engaging with HR in previous roles. It was honestly, it was a miserable experience. And what I'm so happy about and optimistic about is this shift, because it is taking us away from that. And again, mindset's key. It's that mindset of HR as a support function and shifting that to people and people experience as an enablement function. And that's really critical. Yeah,
I like that term, enablement. So we got pretty nerdy there.
Yeah.
Went off on a tangent, but should we go to the intermezzo?
I think we should do a little intermezzo.
Sure.
Because we always do a little dilemma. Would you rather have a team of HR specialists like HRBP, etc., or a team of product managers?
Good question. So I would, in that situation, if it was a startup situation, startup scale up, I would go product.
Product?
Yeah, because the HR elements, let's just say the hygiene factors, you can learn really quickly.
Yeah.
As a non-HR person, as you get bigger and like the actual HR legal employment law complexity starts to increase, then you're going to want to make sure that you've got specialists, at least if they're external or internal, you're going to want to make sure that you've got that covered. But if you're talking about how do we create a experience of work and a work product that is adding value and creating value for end users at all levels, then I would tap into skill sets from outside of HR, and I would actively be hiring. If I was the head of people again now, and who knows, maybe I'll decide that I want to go back into operational, maybe.
You're still in recovery, right?
I'm still in recovery. I'm still in recovery, 3 years in.
3 years in recovery.
If I was a head of people now, I would exactly be asking that question. So how many HR specialists do I need? And this is going to be relative to headcount, complexity, business type, versus how many T-shaped teams is the idea. Like, do we have some deep specialisms in specific areas and a mixture of generalists who can operate on a project basis? Because it's the agility of mindset that's required that's most important. And so you've got great examples like Megan Trotter, who is a UXer turned PX, as she defines it. She was literally a UX designer in product, and she now has a career in applying those principles to people experience teams, currently at the BBC, which is funny because you don't imagine them being particularly progressive in terms of their approach, but it's great. So I would, to answer your question directly, context specific, but the question that I would ask is how many HR specialists do I need versus how many product thinkers do I need? And within that, you need designers and executors. Like there's different types, different levels. But the answer is some HR specialists with a good mix of generalist designers and thinkers that can solve problems that are not coming from a traditional HR background, I think is going to be critical for teams to evolve and add real impact moving forward.
And for me, for example, somebody that does come from a more traditional background in HR, any advice how I can daily, for example, challenge myself to be a bit more product way of thinking? I mean, to think differently. Yeah. Like something simple that I can go back to every day.
The one thing that everyone can do is when you get back to your desk today, look at everything that you're working on, everything that you're solving, everything that you're currently building, and just ask yourself the question, did I understand the actual problem before I started? And if not, if I'm in any doubt about what the core problem is, let me just pause this, go back and make sure that I have some more conversations to understand that the problem exists and that I understand the core features of it. So the main mindset is, again, be problem focused, not solution focused.
And I think that is really nice advice, because I know a lot of projects that I'm currently working or used to work on, I'm so afraid that I'm spend so much time on it, and then it's like, no, by the way, we changed directions, we don't need it anymore. And then you're like, oh, why?
That's the other part to this, is even if I understand the problem, has anything changed? Because again, we can set ourselves off running. This is where the difference between product managers and project managers is really important. Mm-hmm. So let's take the traditional project management approach, which is waterfall, which is we've defined the problem and we've got these series of stages that we are going to achieve to deliver that project. Yeah. It doesn't leave much, if any, room for change, diversion, things to happen. A product manager will be much more agile. It's like, how do we do this in a way that is more iterative so that we can do each stage of this project, and we've got the opportunity to change directions, pivot based on evidence that we need to do so. So those are the two things, actually. Okay. So my work in progress, do these problems really exist, and are they still important? Yeah. And secondly, if I'm partway through a project, how often am I sense checking that nothing's changed, and that has context, culture changed? And if anything changed, it means that we might need to rethink this. Like, how often am I having that conversation?
Okay. Keep improving.
Yeah.
Keep tweaking.
Yeah.
Iterative development, rather than waterfall delivery.
And it also makes it less boring, I think. Instead of like doing it in chunks and sprints, instead of like these endless long projects that never are ending, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Exactly. So maybe let's close it out, and like I want you to close it out, Flo, with a pragmatic question.
Mm-hmm. Like, maybe the key takeaways that I've learned from this talk, because I will go today to my client, look at my projects and the things that I'm working on. I'm like, what am I actually working on? Why am I working on it? And does it actually solve a real problem? Yeah, then I will see if I'm going to implement something, see if I can test it first. I will start simple as that.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah?
And start simple is that exactly the right approach.
Okay.
Do those things. Just check that what you're working on is linked to real problems that you understand and that they are still relevant to the business, like as a starting point.
Yeah.
And so then, just as a last question, is that like the one thing you would advise then? If you had to give one piece of advice for people when they're at work, okay, like how can I apply these principles? What advice would you give?
So to put it into, I guess, a more soundbitey, memorable way, in order to add maximum value, you have to do things that don't scale, which means that you have to spend more time doing that research, spend more time having conversations with end users. Again, that doesn't scale, but it's really important. In any successful business, right, with any product, they do things that don't scale because they understand the importance of spending more time than seems logical, understanding, in this case, the problem, and making sure that they are setting out in the right direction to begin with, rather than what we have all in this room been guilty of at one stage or another, thinking we understand the problem, running a waterfall project from start to completion, wasting, in some cases, 6 months of our time, life, and resources to deliver something that is irrelevant or doesn't deliver any impact. Second, really practical thing that I think links to what we're talking about, I talk about impact ROI. So it's just this very simple model. You've all seen similar things where you have a grid and you've got, for me, you have impact on one side, high to low, and you have time, energy, resource on the other axes. And what you're looking to do is to deliver as many high impact, low energy resource things as possible. And you're looking to eliminate all of the high energy resource, low impact work.
Low hanging fruit, kind of.
Low hanging fruit, but really not just low hanging fruit, but
with impact.
Really impactful low hanging fruit, because there's a myriad of low hanging fruit that you could find that solves a real problem, but it's a low impact problem. So
big
it's
low hanging fruit.
So it's that high impact, low energy effort resource, things that you can take action on quickly that have a significant impact, and impact being relevant to what's most important in the business at that time. So again, we've spoken a lot about policy creation, but if you are working in a startup scale up, let's say, and you understand that runway and cash flow is not great, like spending a load of time focused on policy creation, or the other example we spoke about earlier was benefit suites. So all of that stuff is nice to have. So again, it's impact relative to what's critical for the business at that time. So if the emphasis is on, we need to just stabilize, we need our core ops to work really well, we need to be hyper efficient, we need to get more productivity out of everyone because we can't afford to hire, then that's where you focus your time, not on the nicer, prettier things, which I think is where people's mind go when they start to think about people experience and culture, is they think about all of the shiny packaging and not the core product that sits within the box.
No, I agree. Thank you so much.
Amazing. I think I've become definitely a better product manager in this last hour and hopefully a better HR professional. Awesome. Well, thanks, Luke, for all your insights. It was amazing, really good podcast. Great to have you here. And also special shout out to Personio for sponsoring this podcast.
Absolutely.
See you next time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure.
Yes, thank you. Bye.